For me, a long time ago, 1953, I was deposited in an abandoned house in central Kentucky. Several hours later, there were military trucks and military personnel from the Army Air Corps, there was no Air Force at the time, who came there and retrieved me and took me back to Fort Knox. The Army had been given a message that I was going to be placed there, but they got the time wrong. So instead of showing up at the appropriate time, they showed up 12 hours later, and I had frostbite over most of my body. I was not doing very well. They retrieved me from this place, and they took me to Fort Knox. And there I resided at the hospital, and I don't know for how long. So I remained in the hospital for a while. Eventually, there was a man who was in the armed services, in the Army. He and his wife could not have children, so they adopted me. I was 12 years old, almost 13. And one afternoon, a very, very large craft came out from the trees and presented itself in front of me. It was about a half a mile away, which would be about a kilometer, I think, maybe a little less. It was so large that it was hard to imagine that something like that could actually move against the wind and just float through the air. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like this. And it sat there above the trees, and its lights were gently pulsing over and over. And in that moment, it gave me an inspiration, and I think a message. And it was very simple. The message was, "We see you. We'll come talk to you soon." You could see the moonlight glinting off of the shiny surface of this. It was massive. Something unique and intriguing occurred. I was in a field late in the evening at dusk, and this huge ship came across the top of the trees and parked. And whatever was there and whoever was in it spoke to me and said something to the equivalency that, "It's good to see you, we'll be back." And then it left. I was 12 years old. The very next summer, I went into the woods as I normally would. I was going to meet a friend of mine. He never showed up. Instead, there was a man who came and sat down and talked with me, but he was very strangely dressed. In Kentucky, it's very hot, and there's a lot of humidity. And this man was in a one-piece outfit that went right to his neck, long sleeves, long pants, that you couldn't tell where the pants ended and the boots began. He came up and knew me by name. He wanted to talk. So we had a short discussion. All the while, I had really no idea who he might be or why he would want to talk with me, but he seemed friendly enough, and why not? It was during this conversation that words were no longer used, and it was information that was transferred telepathically between he and I. And we had quite a nice conversation. But then he said he had to leave. And he stood up, walked away, and that was all. It would be another year, and I would eventually have face-to-face contact with extraterrestrials on an ongoing basis for the next 4.5 years. It would occur at least once a week. During that time, there were a great many things that we discussed, that was shown to me, and things that occurred. After this, there were these messages that began to show up. Not messages in words, but messages in a sound in my head. It was like Morse code. It was a beeping, whistling sound. And I understood that when I heard this, that I should go and take a look, because every time I heard it before, I would see a disc. You've probably heard of Billy Myers. It was a disc like this. And it was people like that. This disc would come and land back in the back fields, back in the trees. And I was not at first allowed to go close to it. Instead, they would come out and they would come and talk with me. These things that we would discuss at first were very general. There wasn't a lot of what I would consider to be earth-shattering information or really, really important things. It was more a discussion, a dialogue that between ourselves, what life was like. And you know, I'm 13 years old. I didn't really have a lot to say. After the first year, however, things changed. And when they would show up, then they would bring others with them. And these people would then become my teachers. They had information to share with me. And this information was shared in a very unique and unusual way. You know, when you have a memory stick and you plug it into your computer, how all the information can just be put in there and then suddenly it's in your computer. This is how they would provide information for me. It was as though they put this massive amount of communication directly into my mind. And I had no idea what it was. Just a lot of detail. It was shortly after this began that I started developing a very serious headache. It was what you might call a migraine. And when they showed up, and they were showing up every week, then I told them that this was hurting. I couldn't do this. It was still hurting. It didn't stop. They were quite alarmed, and they wanted to find out why. So they took me inside. I sat down in a sort of chair. It wasn't like a chair like you're sitting on now. Laid back, and they somehow took a look to find out what was wrong. I went to sleep, and when I woke up, they told me the problem had been resolved. You see, the issue was my left and right hemispheres needed to be linked together, and that would allow me to access everything that they were doing. After that, I never had any more headaches. However, at 15 years old, I had a photographic memory, and I was hungry for knowledge, and I would read everything that I could find. Dictionaries, I knew all the words. The encyclopedias, I read through all of them. It was boring. But I had a vocabulary that would stagger my teachers, and they didn't like it. I started reading everything that had been written by the greats. For example, everything written by Edgar Allan Poe, everything written by Shakespeare. I was studying music without the benefit of a music class or a music teacher. Everything. Everything that Einstein had done. Everything from Tesla. All the science and chemistry and mathematics books that I could digest. I was doing fourth year mathematics, college mathematics, in the 8th grade. And then all this information that they had been putting into my mind began to make sense. Now I had a framework because the mathematics was actually the key part of what they had given me. Without mathematics, there wasn't a whole picture. Instead, there were just fragments. But with the mathematics, now I understood. When I was 16, and I had amassed all this knowledge, they taught me the history of the universe, at least their part of it. The universe is quite large. To know the entire history of such a large and large expansive place, I suppose, would be nearly impossible. But they taught me the history as they knew it. And then they went into sociology, the social structure of different worlds. This world, their world, and other worlds that are inhabited by people that look just like you and I. The geology, the atmospheric conditions, all of these things seem to be very important for them to teach me. Why? I'm not really sure. Maybe it's because they wanted to find out how much I could take in before I would explode. But I didn't explode, obviously. And I continued to amass more and more levels of knowledge. I would find that if I put my hands on a person, I could see inside of them. Transparent. You've heard of people who are psychic, that can do psychometry, and they hold something and they know the story. Well, imagine putting your hand on a cow and looking inside the cow. That's what I was doing. Or the dog. Or the fellow that hurt his knee coming off the tractor. And when I felt really sad for him that he couldn't walk 3/4 of a mile home across a freshly plowed field because his leg hurt so bad, I decided I would just fix it. And I did. At 14 or 15 years old. And it scared him and the other folks in the community, and I was compelled to shut the hell up and don't talk about this again. So what Zoe was telling me is that there were a number of people like myself who were brought here, and that in their times past, when they came and tried to help and they put these pieces in place, religions sprung up, and now they were considered gods. That couldn't happen again. The message was lost, but the messenger received the light and the attention. The message can be rewritten by those who hold the power. The messenger can become an icon. That couldn't happen again. Instead, their plan this time was to enlist the help of various other communities out among the stars who would allow for one of their children to be brought here, to live here, to mature here,